almost every application process has at least one interview in it, which is great news, right? You got past the initial screening. But now what? You start to ask yourself things like, what will they ask me? Do I need to do something ahead of time? Is it normal to be nervous? Matt, as CEO of Titan, you have been interviewing devs for 10 years now? Something
10.
Like that? More than 10 years? If you were mentoring somebody, or if somebody just, talked to you on Twitter or came up to you and asked you, what should I do to prep for an interview? What would your advice be?
Main thing is you want to understand the goals, outcomes, constraints, and everything like that of the hiring manager. So you want to understand the company as much as possible. What are they doing? What have their recent hiring looking like? What tech stack do they work in? Anything you understand about the company, and then you want to understand as much as you can about the specific job. So when they're hiring, they're not just hiring for this company, they're hiring for this specific role. So is this a senior, is junior, mid role? Is it more front end? Is it more back end? Are there specific technologies or anything like that? They're going to communicate in those job descriptions to give you a sense of what the focus is. And so you got there because you have something that's interesting to them, but you also want to make sure that you're ready to answer the specific things that they're caring about. And you're going to recognize that looking at the company and looking at the position description is going to give you a sense of where they're going to be most targeted and focused. So at that point, you have an understanding of kind of like overall what this specific group needs. Then you also want to ask the question of what do hiring managers care about in general? Imagine they're going to have 200, 500 applicants for this job. They're going to, in this call, hopefully have winnowed it down to a smaller number to that, maybe 20 or 40.
10%.
Yeah, exactly. And so at that point, they're now going to need to figure out that in a short amount of time, what they can know about you to decide whether you can go on likely to the actual more technical interviews. And sometimes that first call is more technical, but regardless, there's going to be basically trying to kind of shrink that number down to 2, 3, 5 people that they can kind of really go deeper with. So the first thing you want to do is just be prepared to understand what they want, what they need to know, and be ready with answers for that. So first of all, be ready to give answers about your resume or about your history, your experience, because those are going to be things where they're maybe kind of busting through a bunch of people and they want to hear you tell the story or whatever. And of course, it doesn't hurt to Google, what are common interview questions, and be prepared for some of those, what's your best fault or best whatever, that kind of stuff. But one thing that's really valuable, especially as a developer, if you're going into intro level conversations, is that they're going to try and suss out your experience with the type of things that they work with. And they might do it by asking about your experience, but they also might do it with some intro level technical questions. And so let's say that you are a PHP developer who knows Laravel, who knows Vue and React, knows JavaScript, but for the last 3 years, you've been on a project that is React, full end, front end React. They've got Ruby in the back end, and you're a React developer and you're familiar with Laravel, and you're going to apply for this Laravel job. You need to go back and bone up on Laravel. If you're applying for this job, you have the next several days, even if you have to work nights and weekends or whatever, to kind of live in the Laravel documentation. Go check out what's the latest stuff that they've released. You haven't been doing PHP for 3 years. Go look at what's in the latest release of PHP, because you already understand those things. So it's not as if kind of you're trying to learn something you didn't know to try and pretend like you know it, but you're out of date. And so the problem is, a lot of times when people try to see what do you know, is they're trying to see how much you know about the latest and the greatest. So immerse yourself in the technologies and the specific kind of context that that they're going to be asking you about, so that you don't go there and you go, oh my gosh, I know this stuff, but because I'm not fresh, I couldn't answer all those questions, and I looked, like I didn't know anything. You want to kind of avoid that problem by kind of re-immersing yourself in that space.
Yeah, and I think if you have anything, it's interesting you mentioned the example of if you've been in React but you're trying to sort of make the jump back. If there is any part about your sort of application where you're making a jump or a switch, or basically if there's anything where you feel like you might have to explain something, maybe it's a slight career change, maybe whatever the case is, be ready to talk about it, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe practice that. Don't feel, and if there's a gap in if there's a big gap in your resume, that's not a problem, but somebody might ask. Or if you're just switching jobs and you've only been at the last place for a year, somebody might say, hey, it might come up.
What's the story?
It's not a deal breaker, but you should feel okay asking about it. And sometimes it's okay to say, there was problems, or I'm looking for, you should feel hopefully somewhat comfortable, talking about it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and if there's questions like that you expect to be asked, it wouldn't hurt for you to ask a friend or a partner or a parent or a brother or sister or whatever
Yeah.
to just say, "Hey, can you do a mock interview with me? I know you're not a hiring manager, but can you literally just ask me these questions so that you have somebody ask you the question and then you have a little bit more experience and comfort with just saying those words, even if you kind of plan them in your head."
I think another thing, and I'd be curious if you have a favorite thing that you think people should do here, but I think another thing that you should be thinking about when going into an interview is, I think people always hate, what questions do you have for me, right? A lot of times hiring hiring managers will ask you, do you have any questions for us? And sometimes people kind of freeze up and they go, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So I think if it's a job where they maybe haven't fully outlined the process, totally okay to like ask what's the next step. That's a really easy one. But aside from that, Matt, do you have any off the cuff? I'm sort of springing this on you. Do you have any ideas, suggestions for what's a good question that you like when somebody asks you when you're on the other side?
A question that the best type of question reflects that somebody has spent time and energy learning about my company. So they might ask a question about our manifesto or about recent blog posts that we put up. Often those questions, or even a lack of a question, reflects the fact that they have engaged deeply and meaningfully with the stuff that is really important to us. So like the manifesto, for example, at Titan, I spent a very long time writing that, and it's spent even longer time coming up with the ideas that went into the manifesto. So when somebody comes in and they said, you know what, I thought I had a question, and then I spent some time with your website, and I feel like this manifesto really gave me everything I needed to know. Even if they don't have a question, they're reflecting to me the fact that they've consumed that stuff. Now, I don't want them to just kind of like blow smoke, just to be nice or whatever. But like, if you don't have a question, let it be because you have already answered all the questions you have, not because you're not curious in the first place.
Yeah, I think sort of building off the idea of doing research, that if you know who's going to be on that interview with you, like if it's a group interview or something like that, look those people up. Mm-hmm. Try to figure out kind of like what's going on, right? At a bigger company, it might be like a whole bunch of people and you like look them up and you're like, oh, okay. So we got somebody from this team and somebody from that team, and we've got a whole combo of things. At a smaller company, it might just be a handful of people, but even just knowing who you're going to be talking to, their backgrounds, what roles they play, like that can tell you a lot about like where you're at in the process, but also like how the company is seeing this. All that's all just good information to have, right? That way, if you show up and you're like, oh, there's 4 people here and I have no idea who you are, like in a quick, first round meeting, you're still trying to process who are these people, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've had people show up to a call with me and I'm, owner, founder of the company, and they don't know who I am. And I'm like, okay,
not a good start.
Like it's not about me being important. It's about you caring enough about this job to understand what's going on. And if you don't know who I am, that means you haven't listened to any of our podcasts. You haven't gone to our website. You haven't looked at our blog. Like you don't know anything about this company at all. So yeah, this is not going to go well.
And LinkedIn honestly just makes this like really easy now, for the most part. And even if you could just like look like at the calendar invite, what are the other email addresses on here? Let me just go figure 100%. Out names and titles. Like that alone will be super helpful.
Yes. And if you don't get the classic calendar invite with people's names on it, that's a bummer. And that's a place to like, well, just go look at the leadership page, right?
Sure.
If you end up on a call with people and you don't know who any of them are, and you didn't have any time to look them up ahead of time because they weren't on a calendar invite, and they're not on the team page because they're not senior level enough, okay, that's fine. But if you end up with a senior level person on the call and you don't have any idea who they are, and they were on the Google invite and you just didn't look them up, like that's going to give you a lot of opportunities for awkward interactions, and you may not even know that they're awkward when they're happening.
Last question for you, Matt. Is there something that you think people shouldn't do when they prep for an interview? Maybe something that's counterproductive or something that people worry about, but maybe they shouldn't worry about?
I think the biggest thing that is unhelpful when prepping for an interview is looking up the type of interview questions that FANG, so Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, do when you're applying for a job that's not FANG. And that can actually be used a little bit more broadly. Hiring at a massive company with tens of thousands of employees and, millions or billions of VC money or whatever else is very different than hiring at a, 5, 10, 50 person company where everything's bootstrapped and they've kind of made their way here on their own. And so prepping for one, because when you're applying for the other, is going to harm you. And that's true in both ways. If you listen to the advice I give you and then you go apply to Apple, it's not going to be very helpful, right?
Right.
I'm not good at talking about how to get a job at Apple because Apple and Google and them, they're going to want you to know linked lists and all these other things that I don't know because I have an English degree. But if you try and go prepare for those companies and you learn all about linked lists and you don't know the practical things that make you actually useful to me as a programmer, then
Yeah.
you're going to have to spend a whole bunch of time and energy on something that I don't really care about. And that, it's when people go to school for computer science, depending on the program, some of them go to very practical programs that talk all about how to build and how to work. And that's very good for me and maybe not prepare you for FANG. But if you go to one of these programs or do a prep or whatever, where it's all preparing you to get a big tech job, and then you apply to it just like a normal, I wouldn't say I'm a mom and pop, but like a normal job. I don't really care if you can kind of assemble a linked list in C, because nobody at Titan has ever had to work on linked lists in C ever. So why do I care about that? My job questions are going to be about practical things that matter today. So if you do any prep that's outside of practical things that matter to somebody writing Laravel, React, Vue, Alpine, Livewire at a consultancy, then you're wasting your time.
Yeah. I mean, and the last thing I would say is, drink some water, breathe deeply.
Yeah.
It's okay to be nervous. You're going to be
100%.
a little nervous sometimes, but you're going to get through it.
I mean, honestly, as a hiring manager, I've done this thousands of times at this point, and I'm still nervous because I'm trying to do the right thing and I'm trying to give somebody, enough space and trying to get to know them. And so I could do wrong. So knowing that like even these other people who are in the positions of power, like don't fully know what they're doing, kind of can give you a little bit of space that, it's totally fine to be a little nervous, a little bit stressed, maybe go plan. You know what? That's a great point. Plan to take a 30-minute time off afterwards. Go get that drink of water, maybe take a drink, go take a walk, whatever you need. Trying to jump back into work right after a stressful interview like that is not going to work for you.